I was doing a seminar for Lixil. And Fujimori-san, the chief executive, was there, and he'd gathered together about 150 of his top managers to come and have this seminar about communication skills, international communication skills. At the end of it, he seemed really quite excited. He came up and he said, let's do some work together. So I said, fine, great. Now send me some videos. Get your team to send me some videos of you presenting, so I can take a look and understand and get a sense of what's working well, what's not working so well. Our links are working. Let's hope our links are working. Our links are rather slow. We could wait for a long time for this, so tell you what. Oh, here we go. Oh, this is going to be too slow. What do we, votes for having this, or votes for me telling you about it? Who wants me to tell you about it? Who wants to wait and see if it works? You want me to hear you tell me? Shall I tell you? Yeah? I'll tell you. Because we could be a long time otherwise. Right. So, still thinking. So, this was a seminar at Globis, and Fujimori-san making a presentation. And he started off like this. He was speaking kind of like this, and he was looking out like this. And it looked like he was very ill. It turned out he was actually very ill. Now something happened halfway through. By the end, he was up, he was looking at people, he was using his hands confidently. He looked like a different guy. I said, look at that at the beginning, look at that at the end. The man at the beginning, you wouldn't trust with your money, you wouldn't trust them with your career, you would trust them with nothing. You would think this guy needs to see a doctor, just go and see a doctor, quick. Forget about doing business. The guy at the end, you thought, yes, this is a leader, someone inspiring, someone we can follow, completely different. And this personal impact, this big change that you can make through your personal impact is what I want to talk about today. So we'll close that down and hopefully go back to the slides. Now, I want to start by talking about a mountain. This is obviously a mountain of dollar bills. Roughly that many dollar bills, 136 billion. This is, according to the OECD, the amount that Japan's private sector invested internationally last year, fiscal 2013. That's the highest ever number in the history of Japan. There is only one country in the world that has ever had a higher private sector outward bound FDI in the history of the world, and that's the USA. By contrast, the same OECD table gives a figure for China's private sector outbound FDI of 70 billion, 70. Now, of course, China's economy is much more of a state economy than a private sector one, so that distorts the figures. But it's a very interesting comparison. So you guys are investing this huge amount of money, this big mountain of cash internationally. But when you make this investment, you're not just investing in intellectual property and factories and balance sheets. You are investing in relationships. Relationships with new investors, relationships with new international employees and management teams, relationships with international regulators, governments, customers, suppliers, business partners, media, a whole number of international relationships which this pile of cash buys you. And the big question for Japan is, what are you going to do with those relationships? How are you going to develop them? Are you going to invest in them? Are you going to invest as much care, thought, attention, time to the skills of developing good relationships as you do on those corporate assets? Because if you don't invest in the relationships, then the danger is that you spend that huge pile of cash and it goes nowhere. Communication skills are right at the heart of getting those relationships right. And that's why I think this is a really important moment for people in Japan, particularly in business, to think about their international communication skills. And it's not just you sending money out. It's also the world coming to Tokyo. This amazing place, I know there are some skeptics about whether it's actually buildable, but this amazing place will be where the world comes in 2020, 2019, also some countries for rugby. It'll be where the world turns its eyes in 2020, and you will be the center of the world at that moment. And if you and other people in Japan don't have the international communication skills to take advantage of that moment, you'll be losing one of the biggest strategic opportunities that Japan has ever had. Do you know, someone said something very interesting to me after Tokyo won the vote in Buenos Aires. They said, it was a Japanese friend of mine, said, all my life, I've grown up thinking that for Japan, tomorrow will be worse than today. And the day after tomorrow will be worse than tomorrow. And suddenly, for the first time in my life, I can see something in the future which Japan can look forward to, which Japan can plan for in a positive way, which we can get excited about. It's just the Olympics, just sport. It's not the biggest thing in the world, but it kind of is the biggest thing in the world. And it's a wonderful opportunity. Now, because of the work that I do on Olympic bids, I think I've now done 5 Olympic bids, 3 wins, 2 not. And I spend a lot of time thinking about ancient Greece. And there's a danger that this will rapidly turn into dead white men lecture, so forgive me. But I want to talk a little bit about, take you back in time, 2,500 years, to Athens in the 4th century BC. And, the Greeks, actually, if you look at the ancient Olympic Games, which lasted for 1,200 years, by the way, before they stopped in around 300 AD. They were going for 1,200 years. We think the modern Olympic Games, which has been going for just over 100 years, has got a long history. The ancient Olympic Games ran for 1,300 years. Unbelievable length of time. And in the ancient Olympic Games, there were not only sporting competitions, not a lot of people know this, not only sporting competitions, but also communications competitions. Poets would be given Olympic prizes. Rhetoricians, public speakers would be given Olympic prizes. Communication was as much part of the Olympic Games as sport. And of course, because they were the ancient Greeks, they liked to turn everything into a science. So they turned communications into a science as well. And one of the ones who was most famous for turning communications into a science was Aristotle. And Aristotle, as I say, forgive me for the dead white men nature of this section of this talk. Aristotle, in his book about communication, Aristotle's Rhetoric, in fact, talked about two types of communication. He talked about rhetoric and dialectic. A dialectic is, for those of you who haven't read your Aristotle, I never make assumptions. Dialectic is the art of finding the truth by comparing two different perspectives. So you have a pro-argument, you have a con-argument, you weigh them up, and you try to find the truth or get closer to the truth as a result. Rhetoric is something very different. Rhetoric is you already have decided something and you want to persuade people about it. Now, I'll give you a little example just to illustrate the point. So you're with your boyfriend or girlfriend, and if you're using dialectic, you might say, let us consider the pros and cons of getting married. And then we will come to a reasoned conclusion about whether it's a good idea to get married. Whereas rhetoric would say, marry me or I will commit suicide. That's the difference. That's the difference. I've decided something. I'm going to use everything I can to persuade you that I'm right and to act on it, rhetoric. Or I'm going to weigh it all up carefully and rationally, dialectic. Now, in the academic world, of course, dialectic is much prized and valued. We don't want to decide things in advance. We want to weigh everything up carefully, make our judgments. Unfortunately, as you know, in the world outside academics, so much of it is based on many factors of which logic and reason are only part. And so rhetoric in the real world becomes more and more important. And this is particularly true for Japan, because Japan is pretty good at dialectic. Japan is pretty good at weighing up rationally everything. So when a member of the Tokyo Olympic bid team stands here and tells you, the members of the International Olympic Committee, that that Tokyo can cope with 3.2 million passengers per hour on its public transport system, that's a fact. It's dialectic. We accept it. We say, yeah, okay, we get you. No problem, fine, rationally tick. But when the same person stands here and says, like this, you will have the most amazingly exciting time in Tokyo. You will find a very warm welcome, which is how most Japanese people present most of the time. People think, oh, really? Is it going to be that amazing? This person doesn't look very welcoming. I'm really going to find much passion, or is everybody going to be walking around like robots, unable to smile? So this gap between the rational and more emotional is a very interesting one to look at in a Japanese context. One person who, back to our dear friends in ancient Greece, this man, actually a 19th century romantic interpretation of this man, nobody has any idea what he actually looked like, Demosthenes, exact contemporary of Aristotle. Demosthenes started his life as a logographer, which was a speechwriter in the Athenian justice system. So he was like writing, kind of speeches for Athenian lawyers to use, arguing this case for, against, etc. And as he worked, he found that the words were kind of important, but what was really persuasive was the delivery. It's the style, the mood that the speaker could communicate. And he had some very interesting techniques, and I'll tell you a bit about them because they're quite relevant to actually what I do today with my clients. He realized that you need to speak very clearly. So he would speak with his mouth full of little stones. Can make it really hard for him to speak. And by doing that, he made his speech more and more precise. And here, what he's doing is he's actually practicing speaking against the waves. So there's the sound of the waves coming in, and he is using his voice, strengthening his voice, by trying to make his voice heard over the sound of the waves. He had a big polished bronze mirror. It was before the days of glass mirrors, obviously. And he would, for hours, practice speaking, looking at himself in this mirror, checking his gestures, checking his emotions, checking the impact he was making. And in fact, another little thing that links to Japan, one of the reasons he was so concerned about speaking clearly was that he had a problem with his L's and his R's. So there are a lot of lessons that we learn from Demosthenes, but for me, the most important lesson I learn is that good communication is as much about how you use your body as it is your mind. And too often, we think of communication as a mental activity. But when we are actually speaking with each other, whether it is me standing here talking to you, or whether it is you in one-to-one meetings with your friends, with colleagues, with someone you're going to have a job interview with, it's the body that is actually doing the communicating, not the mind. The mind doesn't communicate. It is the body, the organs of the body, that push the air out of my mouth, that make sounds. It is my hands that make a picture. It is my body that is communicating. And this guy 100% got that and worked on communication as a physical activity. Now, he was a bright guy. He was a speechwriter for the Athens legal system. So he also had a pretty good mind. The words were pretty good as well. But what he knew, where he knew he could make the biggest difference was with the body. Bringing it much more up to date, this guy is a professor at UCLA Berkeley. He's called Albert Mehrabian, and he's a psychologist. He's done a lot of work on communication's impact, which has been slightly superficially understood by a lot of commentators. There is something called the Mehrabian rule, which some of you will know about, which splits communication into 3 different categories: verbal, vocal, and visual. So verbal is literally the words you use, and vocal is literally the tone of your voice, the quality of your voice, and then visual is what people see. I'm not talking about visual being slides. I'm talking about the personal visual. Anyone care to guess? He did an evaluation based on a series of psychological experiments which gave a relative value to these 3 things in terms of the impact that you make. Anyone care to guess how that stacked up? How many people think that it's equal impact from words, voice, and visual? Equal impact? Anyone think it's equal? Anyone think that words are the most important thing? Anyone think that the voice is the most important thing? Anyone think that visual is the most? Yes, thank you. You know this. So it's 55, 38, 7. Now, when you pick that data apart, it doesn't apply in all situations. What he was talking about was something very specific. He was talking about when you are trying to communicate a feeling or an attitude. So he was talking effectively about rhetoric, where you're trying to persuade someone based on emotion and feeling, rather than dialectic, which is all hard, cold reason. And he was also talking about situations where there is some ambiguity. When I read that, I thought, now this really does relate to Japan, because if ever there was an ambiguous communications culture on the planet, it is Japanese. An example that he gives is the sentence, it's not that I don't like you. Okay? So I'll say it to this fine gentleman in the front row. It's not that I don't like you. Okay? And I'll say it a different way. It's not that I don't like you. And I'll say it a different way. It's not that I don't like you. The words have an ambiguity to them. So when the words have an ambiguity to them, that's when the Mehrabian rule kicks in. That's when you need clues from the quality of the voice and the body language as to understanding how it actually works, what this person is actually thinking. Do they mean what they say? Do they mean the opposite of what they say? Do they believe what they say? Can I trust them? Do I like them? That's when that rule becomes important. And because in almost every business dealing I've ever seen or ever heard about between Japanese people and the international community, the international people go away thinking, that was very ambiguous. I didn't know what they were thinking. I didn't know really where they were coming from. Do they like us? Do they want to do business with us? Or were they just being polite? We have no idea. So the ambiguity, which you can deal with through the Mehrabian discipline, is really interesting. And I do urge you to go back, if you ever get an opportunity, to the original work there. Because, you know, the internet has done a big disservice to Mehrabian. Because everyone Googles it, they find the Mehrabian rule and say, well, it's 55% visual, and it's in special circumstances. But those special circumstances are more relevant in Japan than anywhere else. In other examples, working with business people, etc. And I want to tell you a specific story from Tokyo 2020, which explains one of the deep principles about getting this right. Now, it's hard, looking back at the beginning of the Tokyo 2020 bid, to remember now that the bid would never have happened except for one man. And that man was Ishihara-san. He doesn't get a lot of credit for that now, and I believe that he deserves a lot more credit. And when the bid began, of course, he was still governor, and I went to have a conversation with him. And I said, okay, so let's discuss the mood that you want this bid to have. And he said, okay, I know the mood, and the mood is one word, and the mood is shining. That's not a particularly original word. You know, plenty of people want to shine. We all would like to shine. But it was a very important word for the project. Because that meant, do you remember Demosthenes and his bronze mirror, looking in the bronze mirror, yeah? Checking himself? Well, we don't need bronze mirrors because we have smartphones and iPads, and we have the ability We have our very own portable high-tech bronze mirrors with us, and most of you will have them with you in your pockets right now. So I could turn a camera at any moment onto any member of Tokyo 2020 team, film them, play it back. Let's take a look at that together. Inose-san. Let's take a look at that together. Abe-san. Takeda-san. Christelle Takigawa. Let's take a look at it. Are you shining? Now, what's interesting is there is always a gap. A gap between how you want people to see you and how you actually come across. I hate it when people do this to me. When I'm supposed to be I'm supposed to be doing presentations which are very compelling about this stuff, and I look at myself and I say, oh, it needs so much more work. But there's always a gap for all of us, always a gap. I'll tell you a very strong, dramatic example of this gap in business. I'm sure you know Vodafone as a business. I know it did not have a very happy time in Japan, but it's had a very happy time in other parts of the world. And the current chief executive is an Italian called Vittorio Calao. And Vittorio, besides being the chief executive of a business which has 150 million customers in over 100 countries with over 100,000 employees, is also a keen cyclist. Semi-pro, actually. And every year, if he has time, he tries to take part in a race. And it's a race in the Italian Dolomites. Well, about 4 years ago, he was doing this race. And because he's quite a big character in Japan, quite famous, there was a TV crew following him. Last day, he'd done a good time. He was ecstatic. There was a TV camera in his face. He jumped off his bike. He had done the best time of his life. He said, I felt like Superman. I felt like I was 21. I felt I could rule the world. I jumped off my bike. I gave this interview, and 100% I nailed it. And then later, this is the way he tells the story to me. Later, I was in my hotel room and had a couple of physiotherapists helping me recover. And I got a text from a friend saying, Vittorio, check out this YouTube link. I clicked. And there was the interview, of course, already up there on YouTube. And he said, I looked at myself. And I saw this guy. He was old. He was tired. He was gray. He was an accountant. And I thought about the gap between this Superman in my head, this 21-year-old, this man who could rule the world, and this old, gray, tired, sad accountant. So he picked up the phone and he said, Martin, we better do some work together because of the gap. The gap. And that gap is there for all of us. And sometimes it's less dramatic than in Vittorio's case. But we all have that gap. So I'd like now, do I have a volunteer to help me demonstrate something? Do I have a volunteer? Yeah? Are you my volunteer? Okay, cool, right. No, please relax, sit there, I'll come to you. Yeah. You're the client. Now this is all in Japanese, so whether or not I'll actually be able to make it work is another matter. Possibly, could you just get me onto video? Sure. Video shooting. In fact, maybe you could be my cameraman. Okay. Yeah? So if you could just sorry, what's your name?
Salami, like the sausage.
Okay, salami. Excellent. Yeah, please. Yeah, just Yeah, just get a. Yeah, great, great, great. Look at me, not at the camera. Yeah. Please. So, yeah, tell me, where are you from?
I'm from Toronto, Canada.
Okay, and you've been in Tokyo for how long?
9 months.
9 months. How are you finding it?
It's wonderful.
Yeah. What's not so good?
It's hot outside. And I sweat a lot, so
Okay.
it's like a waterfall.
Okay. Right. And what stage are you at in your career? What?
Well, I'm in between careers right now. So I was a teacher and I'm trying to move
Into business.
business.
What was your subject as a teacher?
I was an English teacher.
Oh, okay, cool.
Communicator.
Literature, language?
Language.
Right. And so if you're trying to get into the world of business,
Right.
yeah, imagine that I'm interviewing you.
Right.
You know, I've got, you know, I can't remember what my business is. So I have a very, very important business, believe me.
All right.
Yeah? And
so.
you come to me as a candidate,
Right.
and after that interview, I'll be thinking about you. Yeah?
That's nice.
And I'll mainly probably be thinking, what kind of a guy was Salami? For a start, he's got a good name, so I'll remember that. I'm not going to forget that name in a hurry. but what would you want me to be thinking about you?
My energy. That's one thing. Just to have that mental image of me just moving my hands around.
Moving your hands around, how? Because you could look a bit crazy, couldn't you? Like Inose-san.
I guess it's just having that mental image of my energy, you know, the passion.
Yeah,
That's
what you'd want.
what I would
Anything else? I'm not saying there should be anything else.
Right.
Just
Well, that I answer the questions correctly too.
okay. Right. Cool. Okay. So, thank you very much, Salami.
That's it.
Yep, that's it. Thank you again to get me back onto the projector. Now, what we're going to do is take a quick look at Salami, and we're going to ask ourselves I'm going to play this back without volume. We're not interested in what he's saying, to be honest. Remember, ambiguity, Morabian rule, you know, 93% other stuff, 7% words, 93% other stuff. So let's look at the other stuff, particularly the visual. And I want to ask 2 questions here. The first is a question that only Salami can answer, which is, are there any surprises? He looks at himself, and does he think, that's exactly the way I think I am? Or do you look at yourself and see any surprises? Because this is about self-knowledge. Personal impact starts with self-knowledge, and these handy little devices are a very, very good way to get self-knowledge. May sound superficial, but believe me. Now, the other question, which we can all try to answer, is can we describe what sort of a person we're looking at? Calm, excited, cold, warm, professional, unprofessional. What kind of a person are we looking at? If we had to see this and then go away and we said, oh yeah, I saw this guy Salami today. He seemed like a very what kind of person? So I'll try and turn off the volume. That's turning it up. Yeah. Could I please have a round of applause? I just did something technological. Thank you. Come and look at this as well. So any surprises for you? That's the first question. Surprises for Salami. Do we have?
That's a surprise. I leave my mouth. I left my mouth wide open, and
Do you want to switch on?
right. So I left my mouth wide open, and my tongue stuck out at one point, and that's a surprise as well.
You also
My facial expressions.
You do this a bit.
Right.
Looks a bit nervous,
It's a bit
like you're
nervous.
biting your lip.
Right.
Do a little bit of that at the beginning. I'll
Right.
play it from the beginning again. Because I know you're loving this.
There we go.
Oh, we're on a still. Oh, no, we're not. Oh, yeah. Okay, yeah. Now, can we... You're quite... You got energy, but you're quite kind of...
Wobbly.
Little kind of... Yeah? A little bit all over the place.
Right.
Now, could we describe what kind of a person we're looking at? Anyone want to just give me an adjective? What would you say about this person? Thanks. Sorry? Cheerful? Nice, warm, cheerful? Kind? Shy? Sorry? Little nervous? Okay, so those are some first reactions. Nice, kind, warm, shy, a little nervous. What was this man trying to give us? He was trying to give us energy and passion. And we get warm, shy, friendly, a little nervous. It's a gap. It's a gap. And it's a gap that he can work on. And he can work on it starting with his body, because he needs to be a little bit less, yeah, and a bit stronger in his body. The energy is there, but it's like restless energy, yeah? It's like a football player energy. It needs to be more focused. This is the kind of thing we can begin to work on. Then we begin to work on the voice, and then we begin to work on the words. So that is, I mean, Inose-san, who's, I think in a way he's really an artist and a writer, and I always think it was interesting that he ended up in politics. But there was a decision that he took to make his presentations for Tokyo 2020 in English. We said, fine, okay. Because there was a big challenge for him. He doesn't speak, he's not a natural English speaker. But I said, we can do that, as long as you know that for every 1 minute of presentation that you make, you've got to commit 10 hours of rehearsal. So, although we've just done a very little quick thing here, a very, very quick little illustration, the project that it opens up is a big project. Now, you can work on that for yourselves by using our magic bronze mirrors. You can work on it with professionals. So that closing the gap is really what it's all about. And that pretty much brings this part, which is me talking to you, to a close. And I'd like now to get you speaking to me with your questions. Any questions about what we've discussed? Things on your mind about this business of personal impact? Now, I have to say that last time I did a seminar at Globis, I had a lot of questions, so I will be very, very disappointed if you're not at that same standard. Yeah.
So you said the Mirabian rule applies in situations of ambiguity?
Yes.
So in other situations, what would you suggest?
Well, of course, there are degrees and degrees of ambiguity. Personally, I think that if you take, I think the distinction of verbal, visual, vocal is very helpful. I think that's really helpful in any situation. But I do think that the balance of the importance of those things does depend on the kind of situation that you're in. But I always think that the visual and the vocal really matter. Now, I'll give you one example, which is that one of the things I do is, you know that public listed companies have to do public annual results announcements. And it's a very formal piece of communication. It's just going through the figures, and, you know. And in theory, these are very, very clinical pieces of communication. In theory, it's all about the figures and the figures and the figures. The figures are good, everyone goes away happy. The figures are bad, everyone thinks that you're useless, etc. But I do a lot of work preparing management teams, you know, chairman, finance director, chief executive, for those sorts of events and many other things, but for those as well. And in theory, well, what I make a habit of always talking to the analysts, investors, brokers, media who go along to these events and saying, okay, so what was your impression? How was that? Now, in theory, their answer should be very interesting third quarter result from Northern European Pharmaceutical Division. That's what they should be saying, stuff like that, yeah? Because it's all about the figures and the detail. But what they're actually saying is this. They're saying, not great chemistry between the CEO and the finance director. That is not a good relationship. It's not looking great. Or they're saying, has the chairman had a health check recently? They are talking about the mood of that team. They get the figures all the time. They know the figures better than that management too, at least in their own heads. They have this one opportunity a year to look at these people and think, does this team feel good? Is our money safe in their hands? Have they got the energy that it takes? Are they working well together? Is it good chemistry? So all of those things suddenly become hugely important in terms of, in that case, investor and media confidence. So even when it's a very, very apparently rational, let's say dialectic communications thing with apparently no room for ambiguity and emotion, still ambiguity, emotion, how people look, the feeling that they create, the mood they project is incredibly important. The balance does shift, but it's still hugely important. I'm sorry if that is a rather long answer to a very good, simple question.
Hi, I'm Tetsuya. Thank you for the inspiring presentation. Hearing your presentation, I thought it's pretty easy to adjust to the international community or like the Western way of communication by using new tools. At the same time, my question is like with your experience in working with Olympic teams and other Japanese people as well, I want to ask whether, is there anything the Japanese people can keep as like a strength that we already have when we actually go out and compete in the global business rather than adjusting 100% to the Western style of communication?
Thank you for that question. It's actually a question that I get asked a lot, so I'm very glad to hear it today. My impression, discussing with Japanese people, is that for many people, it seems like a binary option. Either we can be Japanese, or we can be international. We can't be both. Now, I'm no expert on Japanese history, but clearly in the Meiji era, this was a big discussion. Can we stay, if we do this project the emperor wants of internationalization, do we lose what's Japanese? Do we lose our identity? And I see executive after executive that I work with asking themselves the same question. Do I have to lose what's Japanese in order to compete internationally? I don't have an easy answer to that. And I do know that I'll give you one little story from Tokyo 2020. Probably the most traditionally Japanese member of that bid was a man who, I don't know how well he's known generally in Japan, but Takeda-san. Do you know who I'm talking about? Yeah? Okay. So you probably know he's from a princely family, and he's quite an elderly guy. He's very fit and active. He doesn't look or behave his age. I think he's 72 or something. You'd think that he was in his 50s or maybe early 60s. An Olympian, an Olympic athlete, but very quiet. Very sort of what we from the West, we think, wow, that's real old school Japan. He seems to have this sort of spiritual aura of calm around him. I'm not joking, seriously. And it's wonderful to see it. And internationally, people get that 100%. They say, wow, there's something really special about this guy. So they're getting that Japanese quality. But at the same time, they think, does he have the kind of dynamism? Does he have the passion? Does he have the energy to deliver something as big as the Olympics? Yes, we get that he's this beautiful guy with this deep inner spiritual strength, but is he going to make real difficult things happen in the real world? And that's when you need to work to bring that inner strength that's very Japanese, that quiet, silent inner strength, and show it. Because if you don't show it, we don't see it. I talk a lot using the metaphor of a piece of wood. Now, you can have a piece of wood cut from a tree, and it's just a raw piece of wood. If you're a specialist, if you're a craftsman or an artist, you'll be able to look at that wood and know exactly how beautiful and useful and strong it is. But you or I will look at it and we'll say, well, it's just a piece of wood. But if you take that piece of wood and you change nothing, but you smooth it and you polish it, you see the color, you begin to see the lines, you begin to see the strength and beauty of it. But if you don't, it's just a piece of wood. And you haven't changed anything. You haven't said, okay, we're going to throw this piece of wood away and give you a piece of aluminium. We said, no, this wood is great. Let's take it, polish it, show the strength and beauty. So the work that I do is not like a cookie-cutter approach, saying, now let me tell you the 3 things you have to do to make a good impact internationally. It's not like that. It's let's find out, like the question we asked Salami, let's find out how he wants to be perceived, how he wants to be perceived, not how I'm telling him he should be. Let's find out what's inside him, and let's bring that out, and let's close that gap. So with Takeda-san, making sure that he showed some energy and passion alongside that calm, it's about the balance. So absolutely, you do not have to, I mean, on the contrary, you don't throw away anything Japanese at all. What you do is you show it in a way that people can understand it for its true strengths. Because otherwise, we just don't see it. We do not see the strength. All we see is a block, a human block of wood.
May I ask the question? Okay. You answered part of my question with that explanation, but my question is about how do you know the difference, or how do you make the distinction between this artificial mask or this artificial projection and a more genuine or authentic projection? And maybe you can give me some examples of who you think has that kind of presence, you know, famous people, whatever, we should be kind of looking at to see what is authentic and then what is kind of fake.
It's a very deep question, and you see it best with politicians, to be honest. Politicians, I've worked with a lot, and I'm always very, very clear that you should be working on what is authentic about you. Because if you don't work on something authentic, if you work on something fake, then you can make it work for a little while. But as soon as you're under pressure, you go back to your authentic self. So what you see with politicians is that if everything is happy, they can manage to be fake, and that's fine. But as soon as there are problems, that image falls apart. So the thing to do is to watch out for people under pressure. Are they the same under pressure in difficult situations as they are when it's all happy and fine? If they are, they're being authentic. If they're not, then they're fakes.
Do you have a favorite example, or like someone you admire? It doesn't have to be politicians.
Well, I mean, you know, people talk about Steve Jobs a lot. I must be one of the few people in the world who is not in love with Steve Jobs for his presentation style. I think he's very good, but I don't think he's the best. I have to say, I think the master is Bill Clinton. Absolute master. And he's a master because Steve Jobs, everyone goes away from having seen, and if you watch, thinking, wow, what an intellect, what an incredible guy, Everyone goes away from seeing Bill Clinton thinking he made me feel special. Now, which is better? For people to go away thinking, wow, what a rock star, or thinking, I felt good. No?
Thank you, Mr. Newman, for your inspirational presentation. Salami happens to be my student.
Oh, okay, right.
In the MBA program. Do you have a disciple who can teach maybe business presentation at the English MBA program in Tokyo?
Well, I hope that there may be a possibility of doing some teaching myself, but that's in the future, and we will see.
I see.
But I have a small business here
I see.
in Tokyo, and one of my Japanese colleagues who I set this business up with, who was my co-coach on 2020.
I see.
So she and I have worked
I see.
for years, and she's great. So there's a small team here in Tokyo permanently. I'm based in London, but
Yeah.
increasingly I'm finding there's more and more demand for this in Japan, and I'm very excited by this opportunity in Japan. In a sense, for Japan right now, this stuff, I think, can actually make a historic contribution. I don't want to make it sound too grand, but I really do think that for Japan right now, if you get your international communication skills right, that will change so many things. And it's more true for Japan right now than maybe for any other country. So that's why I'm very excited to be here.
The reason why we believe that you or your coach can be
Coco.
can be a big help is that there are many people who would say you should do this in international standard.
Yeah.
There are many advisor who said this is the way you should present. But there are many people who will look at maybe Shinpei's question. What's the authentic self of a student, whether he or she is Japanese or international? So, if there's someone who can, guide us, I think it would greatly help our students' career as well as, us faculty.
Right.
So,
Well, I mean, it would be fantastic to help, and I'm really very delighted and actually touched to hear you talking about this difference between trying to find and help the true, authentic strength of the individual express itself versus let me teach you the 3 things you have to do, the do's and don'ts list or something of international presentation, which is unsustainable, because when you're under pressure, those lists go out the window and you're just yourself. And if you haven't worked on yourself, then you feel powerless at that moment.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Very impressive. My question, I read the book, and I was very...
Thank you.
And in the chapter 1, I was impressed by the phrase that, actually, I didn't read the English phrase, but in Japanese, it says, don't act, be yourself.
Yeah.
I was impressed by the phrase. But I also understand that most of the Japanese people are not well express your feelings or the emotions. But could you tell me the difference between the acting and express their emotions?
Okay. I'm going to answer this in a slightly indirect way, if you don't mind. One of the complicated things about this authentic stuff and presentation is this. I'll try and explain it as clearly as I can, but it's something that I've worked out over time, and it took me a long time to really understand this. So I'll try to make it clear, but I don't guarantee. The way that we learn to communicate naturally is through exchange. So our parents lean over our cots and they say, ba 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 ba, and we start saying ga 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 ga, and slowly we say mama mama and da da, and we learn through exchange, we learn through conversation. And in conversation, there are rules that we have learned from the first moment we started communicating as babies. The rules of exchange. And in formal communication, one of the first things you have to understand is that those great natural rules are almost all irrelevant. And in fact, the opposite of those rules is true. I'll give you an example. In conversation, if you're with one person or a small group of friends having a drink or something, if somebody is silent for a moment, then someone will jump in. Unless you're with very, very, very old friends. Yeah. And then a silence is fine, and then there's a silence. It's called a companionable silence. It's so rare that we need a special word for it. And it's only with trusted old companions that you can do that kind of silence. Otherwise, in a normal conversation, if someone leaves a big silence, you think, well, that's weird. So what do we do? And it's as though we have, so with the four friends sitting around having a drink at a bar, yeah, and it's as though there is a ball, which is the conversation. And as soon as I drop that ball, in other words, as soon as I stop speaking, someone else will pick it up. And then it's their turn, and then it's their turn, and then it's their turn. Now, that creates a very interesting dynamic because it means that everybody has to listen. Because at any moment, the ball might end up in their lap. At any moment, there might be a silence and they might have to ask a question or contribute or move the conversation forward. But here I am lecturing at you. You're safe. The ball's not going to drop into your lap. You can switch off totally. There's no there's no social obligation on you to listen to what I'm saying. If you want to, for reasons of study, that's up to you. But I'm not suddenly going to say, right, what did I just say? I'm not a Japanese teacher. So there's no social obligation to listen. So when I'm talking to you, I need to give a feeling that it's a conversation. But it's not. It's not a conversation. I'm lecturing at you. You don't have a turn. It's my turn. And in 5 minutes, it will still be my turn. You don't have a look in unless I let you through questions. But also pausing. Now, if I pause in normal conversation, someone will jump in. And in fact, if I still want to be speaking in normal conversation, I don't want you to interrupt me. So we four friends are having a drink together, and I'm saying something, and I want to make sure that you don't interrupt me, but I need to pause in order to find a word or something. I will go or and that is called a vocalized pause. Or is a vocalized pause, because what it's saying is, don't interrupt me yet, I haven't finished. So when a speaker, remember, I'm a speaker now, not with friends. When a speaker says or a lot, then the effect on the people listening, in normal conversation, it's absolutely fine. But if I, as a speaker, start to say and then what you're doing is you're analyzing that, and you're thinking, whether you are aware of this or not, you are thinking, why does he think he's going to be interrupted? Is he not very confident in what he's saying? Because you're using the rules of normal communication in your minds. So one of the things about staying authentic in this artificial presentation environment is learning that the rules are different. And I will give you one final example, which is I always talk a lot about smiling, because in any piece of communication exchange, you've got two things. You've got the the factual outcome of that piece of communication, transmitting a piece of information, agreeing a project or a deal, selling something, buying something, falling in love, whatever it may be. And also, you've got the building of a relationship alongside that. So you've got a factual outcome and the building of a relationship. And let's assume that in most cases, we want that relationship to be a good, warm, friendly one. There aren't very many situations where we deliberately want to leave with a worse relationship than we went in with. So we got to smile, because that warms it up. But here I am, presenting to you, and I've had so many executives tell me this. They say, I feel like such a fool smiling. I feel like a clown. If I look out at these people, and most people in most business audiences like this, most of the time, and you're telling me I have to smile at these people. I feel so fake. Back to this artificial, fake thing. Smiling, in evolutionary terms, is a response mechanism. You walk into a crowded bar in Tokyo, you see a friend on the other side of the room, and you say, hi, smile. When I do that, it's very difficult for you not to smile. See, you can't help yourself smiling. It's a response. We've got millions of years of evolution that mean when I smile at you, it's very, very difficult for you to stay unfriendly. It's a response. But it's a response to a stimulation. So what you have to do is you have to learn, when you're presenting, to find something in what you say that allows you to smile. Now, people say, people talk a lot about telling jokes and stories in presentation. They think that that's to kind of break the ice. That's what they think. No. The reason is to give you, the speaker, a reason to smile. And when the speaker smiles, other people can smile, because it's a response. So I need something in my material to allow me to naturally smile. And when I naturally smile, you naturally smile, and the whole thing begins to work. But if I stand up here and I say, I'm responding to nothing, so it doesn't work. So learning how very artificial some of this stuff is, and learning to work with that in order to make it authentic and natural. Learning that the rules are different. And you have to understand that the rules are very often the exact reverse of normal communication. And then understanding how to be authentic within that.
Yes, I'm so curious, so I have to ask this question. Can you talk a little more about Bill Clinton? And can you relate Bill Clinton to Obama so that we can sort of visualize
Okay, right, yeah.
his strength?
Okay.
And last question. Does his IQ of 180 have anything to do with his skill?
Is that true? Does Bill Clinton have 180?
184, the highest in 44 presidents.
Whoa. Well, he was educated at Oxford, so that's understandable. Yeah. There are, I'll tell you two things about Bill Clinton. People say that he's a great communicator. And he is a great communicator. He's a great speaker, they say. He's a great speaker. Now, he's a great speaker, but I tell you what he is absolutely world-class at, what he is the god of, is not speaking. He is the god of silence, of the pause. And what that means, well, pauses. Well, we've talked about pauses in relation to how if you pause in normal conversation, everyone thinks that's my turn to jump in, and how therefore we end up saying ums and ers. So in formal communication, if we pause, If we fill it in with ums and ers, or we leave no gaps, then we just look unconfident. So the opposite is true too. If we pause a lot, we seem super confident. We're so confident that we're prepared to let our words drop one by one because we are confident that you really want to think about each word. Walter Cronkite, who was from a previous generation, famous US anchorman, there's an award in the States for most trusted man in America. Do you know this story? Yes. You know this story. I'm not sure if everyone knows this story. I hope you'll forgive me if I tell you this story. Now, Cronkite won this award like 5 years running. And at the end of this, some cheeky young journalist came up to him and said, Mr. Cronkite, you're a great man, but you're just a TV anchor man. I mean, why do you keep winning this thing for most trusted man in America? Are our politicians no good? Why do you win this? And Cronkite said, young man, I am the most trusted man in America because I have taught myself to speak at 124 words per minute. So that's one thing Bill Clinton does brilliantly. The other thing is that he is the master of what I call mass intimacy. As I was saying, contrast with Steve Jobs, like great, people go away thinking, what a rock star, how amazing. With Clinton, people go away feeling warm, thinking he made me feel incredible. He made me feel good in me. And what Bill does is he walks into a room like this. And as he walks in, he doesn't know anybody there. But he goes, look at you. He even moves his mouth very wide when he says, so that people everywhere can see he's friends with everybody already. People think, wow, this man just walked into a room full of friends. Then when Bill speaks, he never speaks generally. A lot of speakers I see, they speak kind of generally like this. They sort of talk, they look generally at people. Bill does this. You're the only person in the room who exists for me right now. It's your turn now. You're the most important person for me. I'm going to talk to you for a little bit. And now you. So everyone from that moment thinks, wow, that's the gift of mass intimacy. And the interesting thing is that when you do that, when you connect with individuals, instead of just, whoa, to the crowd, when you connect with individuals, what happens is that the quality of your communication suddenly becomes more personal. And the people around you feel that as well. And it becomes more like a conversation. Because instead of it being the master or the mistress talking to the crowd, it's a person talking to a person. So that's why Bill is God. And I think Obama, when it comes to words, he wipes the floor with Bill Clinton. When it comes to the rest of the stuff, he's nothing like as good. Bill, if we take the Morabian rule, which I have all these reservations about, which you've heard, if we take the Morabian rule, so 7, 38, 55. So Obama, on the 7, the words, A triple star. On the voice, A triple star. On the visual, A minus. I mean, of course he's brilliant, but A minus. Bill, on the words, it's kind of okay. Sometimes he's brilliant, sometimes he's not. Yeah? So maybe A minus. On the voice, it's pretty good, kind of A-ish. But the voice isn't amazing. Then on the visual, it's magic, gold. And because that's 55%,